So a couple of things. So I just want to put this idea in the back of people's heads. So basically, I want to make sure that you guys get as much benefit from the Wednesday lecture as well, kind of as I said week 1, and hopefully I'm going to stick consistent to. But so a couple of the things that people had mentioned in the discussion posts this week was kind of related to some of the Excel functions with regard to the projects. And a couple people had called out some of the logical functions, which I find to be, I don't want to say like super challenging per se, but it's like you kind of got to think outside the box to really use them. I actually always like to write it down, like what I'm trying to have it do before I actually try to write out the function. But all of that being said, what I am wanting to do today is get through some of the network effect stuff that we were not quite able to wrap up on Monday. And then if we have time, I was going to dedicate to answering some Excel/specific SimNet questions if people have. If people wanted to look at, certain use of functions, obviously, I mean, that could be theoretically for general edification, but also could be a more pragmatic use in some of the projects or something like that. So keep that in mind, because if we have time, it's going to be much more efficient if you have a specific question that I can address or something else. So just as a thought with that. And then also I posted today 2 kind of recap videos on each of the information literacy assignments that were turned in on Sunday. So my goal with those are to give you guys the ability to kind of look through the explanation for what we were looking for from a grading standpoint. So then that way you can also factor it in your head. And then when you get your personal feedback this week, hopefully there's it makes it even easier to link things up and gain understanding and everything else. So so that's there. They're each about like 13 minutes. So, I mean, you're welcome to watch them both, but obviously whichever assignment you did probably is the stronger resonance. So those are posted on the announcements for people that are interested. So just kind of going into, oh yeah, I probably need to turn it on. That's just life for you. Okay, perfect. Okay, so we're going to do a quick, well, probably not terribly quick because I want to review the last couple of weeks, but a content check-in just to make sure that people are feeling comfortable with things. I need to mention some SimNet license related things, learning objectives, a little bit more network effects, and then as I said, if we have time, some Excel. So that's the kind of meat and potatoes of today. So anyone have any questions for now? Okay, so my purpose of this check-in is obviously there's a lot of content in this class. And I know that from the early stages of the class, SimNet is a huge priority because there's just a lot of things that cascade off of that. So I know that people have been focused on that. But I also don't want to like lose line of sight on the lecture content because that's the basis of the final, right? So the final is going to be based on the lecture and then also based on the textbook, right? And I don't want people to kind of lose track of those things and then at week 10 be like, oh crap, 25% of my grade is now looming with like a flashing red light. So I don't want that to happen. So I wanted to just take this time to kind of do a check-in with you guys. So week 1 and kind of the the way I am going to structure this check-in, and also these slides are posted to D2L. So by the way, take notes, but also they're there and available for you guys as well. So the kind of purpose of this check-in is for me to kind of hit the kind of big picture or major topics that were covered in that week's lecture. So that way we have a reminder, and hopefully I can gauge where you guys are at. Also, as a very random question, one of my bosses used to do at meetings Kahoot check-ins. Do people know about Kahoot? So it's like, it's a web-based, like basically trivia sort of thing. You can set up like multiple choice, true, false. I mean, you can do like quizzes or polls or whatever, but it's something that you can connect to. You can get the app for it, or you can just connect to it online. And would it be better for me to do a quick check-in, maybe at the start of lecture for the previous lecture with a couple of quick questions like that? Or is it going to be more valuable to you guys to spend a little bit more time discussing it? Thoughts? It's pretty quick. I mean, like as long as I have it pre-set up, basically what would happen is I would put the URL and the like meeting ID, yeah, or whatever the heck it is, and then you go to the website and then you connect directly to that. So there's probably a little less dialogue if you guys have questions, but I think if you guys are feeling comfortable with the material, Kahoot represents a little bit faster of a check-in. Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. I just, yeah. I just, because Dr. Wagner did something similar without doing Kahoot in the past, and I found that dialogue to be hit or miss from the student perspective of whether or not people had dialogue. So, so we can give that a try if people, are interested. I can set that up for next week, and either probably Wednesday. And as long as you have either your laptop or your mobile device, you can connect to it, and it's pretty seamless. So for now, though, we're going to go through this. So the first lecture, and these are kind of the main takeaways. So I would say need for information literacy. So what does that mean to you guys? Like, what is your first thought from that lecture? Like, what is that saying to you? Yeah?
Having information is great, but if you don't know what to do with it, it's worthless.
Sure. Yeah, having information is great. And if not, if you don't know how to leverage it, if you don't know how to, and obviously the following week was data, information, knowledge, right? Which is clearly kind of a segue, right?
You have a book that has all the answers to the universe.
100%. No, 100%. And again, that goes back to the language thing. I do not speak Chinese, and so therefore that image was relatively worthless for me for that same reason. Anyone? Yeah. Oh, sorry. 100%, right? So let's talk raw pragmatism, which is why most of the people in my life get annoyed with me. Like, it matters also because it matters to you. And it matters to you now, and it also matters to your job in a year or 2 years. So I would say kind of both of what you guys said touches on what I would say the takeaways are, which is it matters in the business world, loud and clear. And it also matters in general because it impacts us in a variety of ways. And I think my philosophy on the general side of things is, we talk about trade-offs quite a bit. Is data exhaust a bad thing? I guess you get to decide that. I don't necessarily think it's terribly bad. Function creep freaks me out, depending on what it is. But I'm willing to have data exhaust as long as I get free stuff from it, right? Like, as long as I get things that I use as part of that kind of transaction, I'm okay with it. And you guys all get to decide, but it is hugely impactful in our lives, right? And so knowing its implications and impact in general is definitely very good. So I would say, kind of touching on that piece, so business strategy. So when we talked about the Venetian versus Harrah's, like kind of what was the takeaway off of that? Yeah. Exactly. So the Venetian is a casino that looks like Venice. I mean, it's like they've invested their resources in giving you a physical experience. And Harrah's is not really giving you any bells and whistles at all, but they've invested their resources in a different sort of thing. And going back to kind of business strategy, it's not necessarily clear when you make the decision which one is right or wrong. A lot of times the correctness of a decision is a something that can only be determined after the fact, right? But the point is that each of these enterprises made a choice using whatever kind of information, whatever knowledge they had, and whatever they were trying to do, and they went a strategic direction. And just knowing that utilization of technology is often a part of that, and how you're using it and for what reason is a really important question for any business professional to be asking. So business intelligence, with that, we're just looking at like definitions, right? There were a couple of different pieces of business intelligence that were definitional. So does anyone remember some of those? We had business intelligence, and then we had data analytics. So anyone remember those? I know definitions can sometimes be a little bit hard. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I would say the added piece off of that is very process oriented. So when you want to talk about business intelligence, a lot of times it's, in data analytics, you talk about data cleaning, pre-processing, and things like that. And that's basically getting your data ready to analyze. But what are the steps? Like, what are the steps that are involved in you getting your core data and getting it to the point that you can then make business decisions? And kind of the process in between those points is business intelligence. And I realize that is rather vague, but it's because depending on what you're doing and how you're doing it, there can be more or less steps. And there are a lot more tools that are on the database side of things now that allow you to streamline some of that. So you can kind of set up what we would have called with Excel like macros, but it's substantially more complicated than that. But you can basically set up subroutines that do all of the processing steps for you. So you can take that core data and get it to the point that it's ready to be interpreted. But the steps that are involved are really the crucial elements of business intelligence. And the point of that really is, how are you supporting strategy, right? Like if you can't take the data and turn it into information and knowledge, then what the hell was the point? It's just a bunch of ones and zeros on some sort of hard drive somewhere. And, again, going back to that pragmatism, there's no point in spending all that time and effort and frankly money collecting something that could be great and then you do nothing with it. It's like buying the awesomest produce and then just letting it sit out, and like you go on a vacation and you come back and it's all moldy. And it's like, well, what was the point? That was stupid. So it's the same sort of thing. So you always want to think about how it's supporting business strategy in any of these conversations that we have. So data analytics. So that was talking about kind of the different tiers or different levels of data analytics. And so that was that kind of quarter of a pizza slice that was there. So do people remember what some of the pieces were involved in this? Yeah. So big data was the very, very top one. Anyone remember what some of the smaller ones are? So we have ERP, we have CRM, web, and then big data. And each one, and I would say knowing the difference between those is obviously just important in being able to differentiate them. Also having understanding on that as you go up, there's obviously more data involved. There's more things that are provided, but also as technology progresses, those lower level things become more foundational and expected and less like, oh, this is a new thing that someone's doing. Like pretty much every enterprise has an ERP, like, or they're gonna go out of business. Like pretty much every enterprise that has any sort of customer touch points has some sort of CRM, or they do not have tracking on what is going on. So it's one of those pieces where it's like, as you get more and more, those other pieces become less notable and more expected. I would say similar to when we were talking about smartphones and we were talking about what that did to the camera industry, I would venture to say that most people didn't actively think about a camera when they were first buying a smartphone. But at this point, I don't think anyone would buy a smartphone if it didn't have a camera, right? And so it's like the ERP and the CRM are now the camera attached to the phone because you just expect them. You just expect them to be there and you don't even think about it. It's just there. Within that, I would say reviewing the image that's there and being comfortable with some of the different features that are involved in the different tiers would be, I think will probably help it stick in your head. It's not the kind of thing that I'm gonna test you guys on like very, very small scale, like there's 20 different categories, which one is which. Like I'm not gonna try like to confuse you guys in some sort of tricky sort of way. But definitely knowing kind of what the difference between those levels are is going to be something that would be good for you guys to know. So then week 2 was data information and decision making. So obviously a big part of that is data versus information versus knowledge. And that was something that a lot of people talked about in the discussion posts last week. So anyone wanna throw themselves to the wolves and try to say the difference? Yeah, so I think what you're saying philosophically is correct, and just because this is one of the more kind of technical pieces. So data is raw, and it is unprocessed, and it is facts, right? So it is undisputed in the sense that it's like there are 5 things, right? We're not saying, you know, what they are, what it means, or anything else, but there are 5. Like if we counted the number of chairs in this room, that is just a number, right? And then information is when you kind of interpret that data, right? You give some meaning to it. And then knowledge is when you give context to the meaning, right? So one of the things that I think can be not challenging per se, but a lot of times we don't recognize the transition from information to knowledge, in the sense that we often go, and we are doing this, we are going from data to information to knowledge, but we often go from data to information to knowledge so quickly that it's hard for us to extract the difference, right? So I think one of the more important things is really understanding the difference from information to knowledge, which is information has some meaning attached to it, but knowledge has context on the meaning. And there was the 2 pyramid slides that we had on the slide deck. So I think going back and seeing those, I would hope that those were pretty helpful. So that would be something that could just really cement that home. And so definitions, pyramid. So types of data. So we had the self-reported, we had the transaction data, and we had the psychographic. I think my biggest, I mean, self-reported is pretty obvious as to what it means, hopefully. I think transaction data, I would say the biggest takeaway would probably be that it's not just I purchased something from Ani, right? It's a reflection of action, right? And psychographic is how you're feeling, maybe the motivations behind the action, but psychographic to a large degree is kind of, let's say, the holy grail, as it were, of businesses, right? If you can figure out what people's motivations are, and that's going to give you a lot more ability to leverage them buying something, right? Because like right now, we all buy stuff on Amazon because it's ungodly convenient, right? Like you can literally sit there and get it tomorrow, right? But if Amazon knows exactly how you're feeling, right? Like if Amazon knows that like if Amazon knew your final schedule, and if Amazon knew your due dates for your class, and if Amazon knew how to monitor when you're stressed and then made like a recommendation where you're like, hey, you want a 6-pack delivered in like a couple hours? Like, I mean, but like seriously, like that is the whole point of psychographic data, right? Like what level of control do you have if you're stressed and the thing that you want that's going to alleviate that stress is readily available to you and then mentioned to you, right?
It's like learning how best to take advantage of people.
Oh yeah, no, it's predatory. No, it's well, but I mean, so okay, how's this? It can be predatory, right? Because also think about the other thing where it's like, how often do you know exactly what you need? Like, you know, one of the things that I would challenge people on is what level of self-awareness do you have? And whatever you think you have, it's less than that. And I mean, myself included, like, you know, and so it's one of those pieces where it's like, there are plenty of times where like Amazon or Google recommend something to me and I'm like, oh my God, I forgot. I did want that thing, right? And so it could be predatory. And I think that goes back to the idea of like function creep, right? Like not all function creep is bad. A lot of it is, right? And, but theoretically, it's not always bad. Like if you're giving your information to Delta because you're going to fly somewhere, but Delta has a partnership with a bunch of like travel agencies or hotel booking places, and you haven't set your booking yet, and you start getting ads for booking, but you end up getting an ad that is the cheapest ad. And now you save money, and it was convenient, right? Like that objectively is function creep and is not necessarily bad. But I think the thing that continues that I'll kind of hammer home about the reason why it makes me uncomfortable is my lack of awareness of who's getting what and what their intentions are, and my lack of control of it is where like my hackles stand up. So to your point, that goes into the business ethics conversation, which is like, okay, it's available, and how are we using it, and should we be using it? So you're 100% correct, but I mean, like, yeah, it absolutely has the potential to be predatory. Same way with buying all of that data, right? You know. So data in context. So what was our takeaway from that? So that was our discussion about what we can tell from someone or something based on what they are collecting. So kind of, if you remember, we had the 4 different people that talked about the different priorities they had for computers. And there was 2 groups that represented like Apple and Microsoft that didn't even say mobility, right? And imagine if those companies actually didn't gather data on whether their computers were going to be functional in a mobile environment. And the fact that I believe there was only like 3 people in the class that still had a desktop, which means that everyone either uses a laptop or a mobile phone or a Chromebook or something, right? And so it's like, what level of customers would those enterprises lose if their stuff wasn't calibrated for a mobile environment? You have a question or just no? Okay. So it's very worthwhile to keep that in mind. And it's also worthwhile to think about the fact that you can tell a lot about what a company is trying to do based on what they are collecting in the same sort of way, because you unfortunately cannot collect everything, which means that what you choose to collect is signaling what your priorities are. And if you know what someone's priorities are, you theoretically can reverse engineer what they're trying to do, right? So it is something to think about with that. So we talked about data collection. So obviously the data exhaust assignment segues with data exhaust function creep. And those are things that obviously we've talked about already. And the ethics piece we touched on there. So being comfortable with data exhaust. I'm always going to challenge people to kind of think outside of the box. And so I would say there's very rarely a thing in this class that is going to be binary for me, in the sense that yes or no, good or bad. I think as we were discussing, function creep lends itself towards a very like potential for bad, right? But you know, it doesn't have to be. And so that's why I really want everyone to be mindful about the ethics of either of these things, right? And one of the pieces that I think is interesting about data exhaust is, as there's more laws that are coming out about data privacy, data collection, and some of those other things, there's a very real push for us to be able to monetize our data, which I think is awesome. Like, I should get paid for my data, like if it's valuable to you. But here's the thing, right? So it's easy, especially as business students, to be like, I want to make money off my data. Fine. But then does Google start charging us? Right? Like, so it's like, it's one of those things where it's like, yes, I am engaged in the idea of making money off my data because it's valuable to them. But then where is the balance point? Well, yeah. And I mean, I think some of that is like, there's some laws in the EU that are much more protective of data. And there's some discussion about kind of rolling a lot of similar, not the same, but similar laws to California in a lot of ways. Once you kind of have those two places, it kind of goes worldwide, because most of the companies that we would be talking about have so many users in those two places that it's like, it basically grandfathers in those laws everywhere, right? But you're right. Like, there's just all sorts of different directions, because it's easy as a yes, no thing, where if I was to go and be like, hey, do you want money for something you're already doing? Like, most people would be like, yes. Is there a like trade-off, or is this a trick question, right? But then the trick question is, okay, well, you get money for your data, but now Google costs $5,000 a year. And the interesting thing was, there was a study that someone linked in one of the discussions that showed that it would take $17,000 a year for like average people that were part of the study to not use like search engines like Google. Yeah. But the article was targeted more at like, what are the GDP or economic effects of a lot of companies that have value but are not creating revenue from that value, right? And I mean, that's a kind of different sort of discussion, but it was interesting in the sense that there was like different ones that were more or less, and it was like, you know, Facebook was a couple $100, you know, for the year or whatever. But just the idea that it's like, okay, if it's that valuable to some people, not me, I'll just get an encyclopedia or something. I'll go old school, I guess. But I mean, the fact is that where data exhaust isn't good, bad, and we gain from it. Like, there are a bunch of services that we get for free or for much cheaper than it would cost if you were buying like Microsoft software, where you're just buying the software. And so we get stuff for free from our data. Now, are we making an even exchange off of it? And I would say right now, no. But purely monetizing the data has the side effect in the other angle, right? So anyways, I just bring that up in the sense that I want you guys to consistently think about, like, okay, this is a thing. Okay, what are its ramifications? What does it mean to me or to a business or to something else? And then form your own opinion off of it. And then the design of technology. So that was talking about the garbage cell phone, right? And one of the other pieces that we'll talk about a lot in this class is enabling and constraining. So it's not something that, like, you want to think about technology as a tool. Sometimes we don't think about it that way. Sometimes we don't think about it as broad as that, because we think about the action that you're able to use it with. But technology is no different than like a rototiller. It's like, sure, you can churn up the dirt and that really helps if you're gardening, right? But like, just because you have a rototiller doesn't mean you're a gardener. It doesn't mean you're a farmer, right? And so technology is just a thing that does something for you and hopefully makes your life easier in that specific task or that set of tasks that it's covered with. So it enables action, but it also has the possibility to constrain that action. And it depends on the design and it depends on a variety of other things. But this is kind of that teeter-totter that you always have to be mindful of. And then I would say the social shaping, and that's where you have IT and the social world having that feedback loop. So it's kind of a chicken and the egg sort of argument sometimes of which one comes first. Was there a need for smartphones? I mean, there certainly is now, but I think part of the reason why Apple had such a market advantage was because we didn't know that we had a need for something. So it was like, in that case, IT created something. And then once people were able to know that it was possible, now the social world demanded it. And then there were new things that were added on or different ways to use it. Think about the difference in the app stores and what's available now versus 5 years ago, let alone 10 years ago, right? So our demand has shaped that. And so you get kind of a circular feedback loop, but it's often hard to figure out where it started, but just understanding that it does feed into it and each one influences the other. And then lastly, I can assure you that that picture, which is worth 1,000 words, will be on the final. I can 100% assure you. So if you recall, there was someone who made perhaps a good choice, perhaps a bad choice. He made a customized ladder, and there were ramifications on the oncoming train, right? So the idea that technology does not exist in a vacuum is that decision-making doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? He made a choice, and hopefully he didn't make the choice knowing that a train was coming, but he made a choice to grab the train tracks because he needed a ladder, right? And his choice does not exist in a vacuum. His choice impacted and affected other people, other things. And technology is the same way, right? So again, I think that in my mind, and hopefully in your mind, that kind of all of these things play into themselves. They all kind of touch each other. Involved in that. Well, that definitely touches on a lot of technology design, certainly social shaping, technology design, enabling and constraining certain things. Well, that certainly doesn't exist in a vacuum. You create something with the intention of doing this, this, and this, and you don't even think about the negative door that you open or perhaps something that you close. So are the main takeaways that I would have from last week as well. Any questions other than my rambling? No? Okay. Okay. I'm going to skip the week 3 slide just because we are going to, one second, because we haven't really finished talking about that. So here's one quick thing that's really, really, really important. Everyone should look at this and say, is my SimNet user ID on there, or the email or whatever that you gave? Because if you're up there, it means that SimNet right now does not think you have a full license. It means that you have not updated your temporary license that you started with your full license. And it has now expired. And it means that you cannot do things. And it also means that I will not see any of the things that you have done from now until forward. And I would love for everyone to pass this class, but I can assure you that that is an impossibility as long as that exists. So this is just my throwing it out there to people. If you have not acquired a full SimNet license with Access and Excel 2016, and or have not updated your account because you've purchased it but you just haven't done it, do it. And if you have questions about it or anything else, please let me know. But if you have any problems with it, also definitely call SimNet tech support. Get a case number for me so I can yell at them, which I will. And I think they're open 24 hours Monday through Thursday. And I always have like just an odd little bit of extra fuego at like 9 o'clock to about 10:30. So like, man, you shoot me that email and I'm raring to go. So I already had one conversation with them today because I was trying to solve the problem for these people, but unfortunately, it has to be you guys at least initiating stuff. So for those of you that exist, fix it. Okay. Learning objectives for today. Basically, we're just going to finish up the network effects, and then we're going to target a little bit of the terminology that they use in the book. It's slightly redundant, but one of my pieces that I really want to support you guys with the Wednesday lecture is trying to alleviate some of the time that you have to spend with the textbook. So either if you've already read it, then this reinforces, or that maybe if you haven't read it, then you just can review it, right? But I'm trying to support you guys with that, so your out of class time can nominally be focused on either SimNet or the information literacy assignments where possible. So that's kind of my goal. So I understand that there's going to be a little bit of redundancy, but it's going to help you because some of the questions that we have from the textbook will be kind of terminology based from their perspective. So you'll kind of get it both ways. So largely, learning objectives are the same: information technology, information systems, critically analyze and be aware. Network effects are crucial, obviously. And then if we have time, some Excel questions. Okay, so I know we had talked about this, like kind of, but this was as we were wrapping up. And I understand the level of focus that people have and retention definitely dwindles as we get 10 and 15 minutes from class ending. So, or even when I start talking, who knows? So network effects, the end point of network effects. And I think, Carter, you had a couple of good points on the discussion board about monopolistic sort of feel. And you're 100% correct in terms of the end point effect, right? Which also goes back to governance. And so I'll bring that up in a second. But so a Tippy market is when a network effect gets to its maximum, and suddenly you have the full winner-take-all market. Samvel has kicked my butt. He has this awesome network effect. It continues to grow, and at a certain point, I just can't compete. Either I have to give up and do something different, or maybe he acquires me as business. Who knows, right? But at a certain point, when the market tips, it means that whatever enterprise, whatever person, whatever it tips in favor of, they have such an advantage that the other people in that market cannot compete. So as the network effect accelerates, the more units consumed, the higher value per unit. Success feeds in upon itself, and it's almost like you have a reverse spiral. It continues to just go outward as it's feeding into itself. So I don't know what Mosaic is, but I assume a web browser. Just because Netscape or maybe email, but Netscape versus Mosaic. I need to remove that as an example, but HD, I'm just saying, like HD DVD versus Blu-ray. Someone on the discussion boards was talking about Xbox versus PlayStation, and I think that's been a back and forth thing. Very interestingly, because I love RPGs, it was interesting when Xbox and PlayStation came out because Xbox was new to the market and PlayStation 2 was already established, having had the PlayStation 1 and certain other things. And so there was much more, or many more games that were available on the PlayStation 2. And so they had a huge advantage, and Microsoft was actually able to break through, even though there really was a tippy market in favor of Sony, but they were only able to break through by, yeah? Well, A, you're correct. So every Xbox sold was costing Microsoft money. And so think about this. Like, think about the power of a tipped market. The original Xbox was substantially better from a technical standpoint than the PlayStation 2. Like, its hard drive was bigger. All of its processing power, everything involved was better. I mean, it was ugly. So other than the ugly, but I mean, exactly. I mean, the PS2 was a little bit more like acceptably, I mean, they're still ugly. I mean, but the point is that it's like from a hardware standpoint, the Xbox was better. The controller was a little bit awkward, and that goes into a design element. But the real endpoint was because Sony had that tippy market, every Xbox was sold below cost to produce, let alone the amount of money it cost to design it, let alone all of the cost that it was to support it. Also, the only games that were good on the Xbox initially were Microsoft proprietary. And Microsoft had really never been a game company, so they had to acquire studios. So think about the billions of dollars that it took for them to acquire studios or acquire IP just to get enough that people were like, well, this isn't garbage, right? And then they actually had to have their next generation come out a year before their competition and have like strong games developed as a pipeline so people would go for them first. So like, I mean, I don't know that anyone's ever seen the numbers involved, but Microsoft clearly had to spend like tens of billions of dollars just to catch up, right? And the fact is that like that's the power of a tippy market. Imagine if Microsoft hadn't been one of the 5 biggest companies in the world. Like they would not have the resources to do that, and they never would have been able to, branch in. So, I mean, honestly, like Blu-ray was actually, I mean, Blu-ray is technically a better product than HD DVD, but the biggest reason why Blu-ray was able to have an advantage was because Blu-ray was supported by Sony. And there was just a lot of IP and a lot of studios that supported it. And so it came down to, consumers using it and everything else. But what ended up happening is the companies that were supporting HD DVD, when there was a tippy market in favor of Blu-ray, they were just like, it's not worth it. It is so expensive to try to fight against a tippy market that a lot of times it's just like, man, I'm gonna do something else, And so it is amazingly powerful. So inferior products that move first may dominate. I mean, PlayStation 2, I mean, like if you talk about the hardware, and then obviously us talking about complements, you would say that the software or the games are complements, and for a video game system, they're hugely crucial. But, and so that kind of, I think the first mover advantage, and then also the number of complements that people wanted were really crucial in that regard. Product introduction is difficult, and entry strategy is crucial. So, I mean, talking about the Xbox, again, not to hammer that home, but also there were a ton of miscues that Microsoft made with their Xbox that probably made it even harder for them to catch up. The controller was really not great initially, and there was a lot of other pieces that they didn't communicate. So if you're trying to do a product introduction, if you're trying to break into and compete against a company that has some sort of network effect in place, you have to be that much more strategic and that much more planful. And those are just two companies examples. So here, you just see that kind of exponential curve. And so as the number of users increase, the value to each user goes up, and not by a one-to-one, right? I would say that it is highly likely that this and the following image will be in a final exam sort of situation. Maybe together, maybe not. So this image is talking about, so when it says penetration, they're talking about like market penetration. So what percentage of the market each company has, basically. And so here you have obviously firm B a little bit behind firm A, but not terribly behind firm A. And so we have this T1 point, which is when you start seeing a positive and a negative network effect, right? And then T2 is where you have that Tippy market in place. And because of that exponential curve upwards for firm A that's having a network effect, by the time they get here, look at how large the separation is between them, right? It's no longer, I don't know, 5%, 10%, whatever the percentage breakdown is. Now it's 40%, right? And it's only going to continue further because it doesn't stop there. And I mean, you probably would say that like the difference was probably here to here for Microsoft versus Sony. I mean, when the Xbox came out. I mean, really the only thing they had was Halo. So anyways, but so the Tippy market is super, super crucial to understand, because also you want to think about why. So why is the Tippy market so important to understand? Because if you want a network effect, that is the end point, right? That is the goal, right? Like if you're trying to achieve a network effect, what is that? That is a competitive advantage that allows you to have market dominance, that allows you to have a winner-take-all market, and now your competition really isn't your competition, right? So that is the proverbial victory for you as a firm. So one thing before we cover the not network effects, because we were talking about the monopoly, right? And so it's an interesting discussion because network effects are not monopolies. Because you have some competition, you have different other pieces, so you have, a monopoly could have a network effect, but just because there is a network effect and just because there is a Tippy market does not mean that you have a monopoly, right? And so this kind of goes back to one of the things that I'm super passionate about, which is our government is so far behind what technology can do, right? Because if a monopoly is there to provide consumer options and consumer protection, right, then you probably shouldn't allow a Tippy market to exist, right? But because it's a purely tech side of things and there's all these other pieces, there isn't governance of it. So some of the people that were discussing things on the discussion post, the end result of a Tippy market is remarkably similar to a monopoly. You have a winner-take-all situation. You have market dominance. People can't necessarily compete with you. You have all of those things. But because it's not technically a monopoly, it's allowed. And it's really like, it's like the old thing of like dressing up a pig. And just because you dress up a pig doesn't stop being a pig. But with the government, unfortunately, a pig is only a pig, not an address. Once you put a dress on it, it's not a pig anymore to the government. So things that are good to remember that are not network effects, especially because a lot of network effects are tech and digital related. So virality which I think we've all heard the term of, oh, that went viral, right? So virality is the increased speed of adoption. And so virality could happen with a network effect. Again, going back to the monopoly piece, they could be happening in tandem, but virality does not necessarily mean there is a network effect. So can people think about something that might be viral that's not a network effect? Oh yeah, actually I did that and succeeded. It was unpleasant. I will say the cinnamon challenge was unpleasant. There was a time in my life where I never said no to or lost a dare, which is an unfortunate thing for people that know you to know. I will say that. But yes, like, you know, the cinnamon challenge was definitely something that went viral. I would even say, like, think about the like Facebook de-aging or aging sort of thing, right? Like everyone was doing it, or the ice bucket challenge. Like it goes like, I don't need cold water in my life. No thanks, right? But just because something happens rapidly and in a social media world, how often does that take place? That doesn't mean that there's actually a benefit to people as more people do it, right? Like, if anything, the cinnamon challenge is a perfect example of it being anti-beneficial. Yeah, I mean, yeah, but that's almost like a side effect of it, right? Because it's like, if you think about it, like, if you really focus on what the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge was, I can't say that I gained anything by having a cold water dumped on me if you also had cold water dumped on you, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like, so it was what people ended up doing by participating, but that was raising awareness and certain other things. So, but the point with this is the virality is how fast people do something. And that doesn't necessarily mean that each user is gaining additive benefit as people do it. So that's really crucial because it's the added benefit that is so fundamentally important with a network effect. The more people that are doing it, each person that jumps on the train makes the train better for everyone. So as I said, you don't need viral growth. I mean, so right here, Airbnb is one example. Amazon is a great example. I mean, like, Amazon was just like books, random crap. I mean, I would have to go back and see how long I've had an Amazon account, but it probably wasn't until what, the last 4 or 5 years that like every one of my purchases was on Amazon. Like right now, my Discover card, 5% cash back on everything made on Amazon. And it's like, man, loving life. Buying some cat litter on Amazon, buying random crap on Amazon. But it's like, but it's one of those things where it's like, Amazon was also something that grew slow. So, I mean, you could make the case for Apple, especially in the 90s when they almost went bankrupt. Like, there was a huge slow burn on Apple until the iPod came back and they were really able to kind of gain some advantage. So you can create a network effect without needing that rapid growth. And then scale doesn't necessarily mean you have network effects. So that happens a lot of time in, like, think about large scale enterprises that have a market advantage. You could make a case of like a psychological benefit of like me wearing Nikes and anyone else having Nikes, but like that's a rough connection to make. But Nike is the #1 company in the world in apparel and footwear, right? So they certainly have economies of scale. It allows them to make their products cheaper and everything else. Like Amazon, for example, the network and economies of scale. So like if you can get it both, that's real nice. But one does not necessarily mean the other. Viral growth and network effects can occur at the same time. So I would say when you think about this, the Airbnb example is definitely correct, but they probably had viral growth in the maybe like 2013 to 2015 zone. I'd probably have to go back and look at the exact breakdown of where their market percentage went up like that. But so you don't need to have viral growth to start a network effect, but often you have viral expansion as you're accelerating towards a Tippy market. You got a question?
Is there a number attached to virality? Like it has to be an increase of 20%? Pure curiosity.
That would probably be a better question for like digital marketing. So that, I mean, that's not, I don't know. I suppose I can Google it. The great God of Google knows all. And then kind of here, viral growth will occur without network effects. So Angry Birds, no judgment, but it's a garbage game. You know, a lot of people downloaded it. Or what is it, Farmville? Like everyone's aunt who wants to like Farmville request you on Facebook, and you're just like, what? Who even are you? I'm not going to family gatherings anymore. Interestingly, so you could actually make a case, again, going back to like a multiplayer sort of thing, that Angry Birds didn't get network effects. Now they had virality, word of mouth, people were doing it. Oh my gosh, it's so fun, great. But because people were playing alone, it didn't have the benefit of network effects. So there is a game that I admittedly was addicted to for a minute, which was Clash of Clans, was a game that you could play against people, right? So then suddenly that does benefit from a network effect. So again, it's one of those pieces where you have to ask yourself, like, first and foremost, is it better for me and the other person if we add a third person? And if the answer is yes, then you at least can start thinking about the potential for a network effect, right? But frankly, it doesn't matter if every person in the room is playing Angry Birds and then an additional person does it because we're just playing by ourselves, right? So there's no possibility for a network effect. So if there isn't that potential for interaction and then amplification, it's not there. Cool. So is that good? Is that we feeling okay? We love networks. We love the effects. We want a business that has it. We want to just chomp, chomp, chomp on that Tippy market. It's good. It's like make all the money. The one thing that's actually really interesting about like a Tippy market is also the idea that it sucks for the consumer, right? Like think about the fact that like, yeah, most of the people in the room have shifted away from Facebook. I know we've talked about that or whatever else, but like the fact that Facebook has WhatsApp, the fact that Facebook has Instagram, like, is there any motivation for them to even try new stuff? Like, I mean, like, yeah, they want more people and they want to do other things, but so just as a quick show of hands, how many people are aware of Libra in the context of Facebook? I did raise the hands. I didn't ask what it was, Carter. Seriously, man. I mean, the one time that I don't want student questions. Jeez. Okay, but like Carter said, sorry, all regulation aside, Carter, I do appreciate it. So Libra is a cryptocurrency that Facebook has talked about and seems to be crumbling for a wide variety of reasons before it even starts. But the thing with that is Facebook is trying to add more complements that keep their user base there, right? They're trying to add more stuff that's going to add different value that also will play into their already existing network effects, right? And I only mention that, and there are other reasons why they might do that, but if you think about it, almost everything that Facebook has done in, hell, probably 4 years, maybe more, is stuff that some other company did. They only did it in response, and they only did it to keep their users, right? Like the story feature on Instagram was created specifically because of Snapchat, Like all of these different features that we use were really created because some other competitor did it and people liked it and everything else. But think about this. Think about how big of a company Facebook is. And think about how much resources they have, right? Like none of those ideas were completely new. There are definitely people that probably had those ideas and Facebook just didn't have an incentive to try them because they have such a strong network effect, right? So it's like network effects, when it's in favor of a company, can lead to some very real complacency, which I would say is not beneficial to us as consumers because it eliminates competition or it at least mutes the competition. So as much as if I was running a business, I would love to have a network effect that was leaning towards the Tippy market, as a consumer, it's not necessarily great. So just again, that piece to think about, that almost everything in this class is not going to exist as a purely good, purely bad. It's very contextual. So I am going to hit these, well, by a show of hands. Did people want some Excel knowledge? Did they want that? Yes, no? Yeah, I mean, do we have questions? No, we hate Excel. Sure. Oh, speaking of that, I found the greatest meme. I forgot to put it in this. It's great. It's a Microsoft meme. Whew. Get ready for it next week. I promise. It's going to blow your socks off, guys. Seriously. Okay, but if there is value for that, I just want to make sure that I'm targeting time for it. Because I said it was there. Okay, cool. And you are more than welcome to have just the best Wednesday when we get to that point. Indeed. Shoot. I started calling Monday Tuesday -1 because my girlfriend gets really, really mad at the idea of Monday. And I was like, man, I hope you have a good Tuesday -1. And she was like, that sounds so much better. And I was like, yeah. And we could call Thursday like Friday -1, and then you're like that much closer to Friday. It's just, it's all sales, right?
Well, but then you're like, those are opposite effects. Would it be like Thursday? Well, Friday would be Thursday -1.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So it's, well, yeah. No. Friday is totally Thursday +1. Yeah. No, Friday is totally Thursday +1. It's the day after Thursday.
What do you call Thursday?
I call it Friday -1. I can do a number line with days. I can do a number line with days for you. There's right now. I would never. Yeah, right? I would never, ever. No, I'm trying to let us have more Fridays. If anything, I'm trying to deliver more Fridays in our conversation, whether it's real or not. Okay, so I'm just going to hit these very, very quickly because it's me kind of trying to mention the main takeaways from the book, right? So again, the purpose of this Wednesday lecture, hopefully, is to support you guys being able to study a little less on the lecture and textbook related content, and so you can focus on some of the other things. So that's kind of what I'm targeting, hopefully. But I'm going to hit these pretty quick. So network effects. So I would say the additional takeaway here is, so we've already talked about value of the product or service. Okay, so we've kind of hammered that point home at this point. So there's also some terminology where it can be called network externalities, or it can be called Metcalfe's law. Those are a little bit more technical definitions, and those things can be thrown around. And so just so you have that in the back of your head, I try not to be too definitional in the questions I ask on exams, unless I tell you this is an important definition and you should know. So if I decide to go that deep, I'll let you know. But for now, I would say it's observational and worth knowing, but you probably wouldn't see it on a multiple choice test. So the presence of network effects is obviously going to influence the choice of a product or service. So there are a couple of things that go into a network effect. So the first source of a network effect is what's called exchange. So it becomes more important because those nodes are communicating to more people, right? We talked about that where we had 2, and then we had 5, I think, and then we had some large web of nodes that were connecting together. But as you can communicate with more people, the ability to exchange information or goods or whatever it is, that touch point between 2 pieces becomes more and more valuable because you have more possible pieces that you can interact with. Yeah.
So do network effects not exist in networks that are unilateral communication?
No. Because, well, okay, so what do you mean by unilateral communication?
Communication is only going one way.
Yeah, I would say it would be hard for me to come up with an example where that would be true, because it kind of has to have the ability for both to touch, right? Because like if you think of, yeah. No, I mean, like, so think about it from the example of Facebook. The very first starting point was basically a passive storage of information. No different than really any other website, right? And so you would go there and you would get information and you would go about your merry day, right? So in that case, there wasn't any possibility of, you know, what you're saying of having the different sort of exchange, right? So you do have to have the ability to have an exchange. So every product or service has to foster some sort of exchange, and kind of any firm leveraging technology could possibly benefit from this. And again, that goes into the idea of like what, where, right? Like what are you doing? Where are you doing it? How are you doing it? Frankly, from a business standpoint, you should always be targeting that. So staying power is something that I would almost say is a risky side effect of a network effect, which is once you have it, once you have that cemented kind of foundation as a business, it's hard to disrupt you, right? It's hard for someone to push you out. It's hard for any of that to happen. So you have more staying power. So one of the technical things that's definitely worth knowing, switching costs. So if you were looking to go from a PlayStation 2 to an Xbox, what do you lose out on? You lose out on all of the games that you're there to play. That was back before you had a lot of like online gaming on a console level, but maybe in a modern Xbox versus PlayStation situation, you would lose out on most of your network of, and you would possibly either lose them, or maybe you'd still be able to play with them if they also had a PlayStation. And so there's all these different pieces that go into what created that network effect. And the user loses it. I mean, they're having fun out there, man. Bunch of advertising people. It's just like a fraternity. Nah, why? So the switching costs are often the thing that are the barrier to exit for the user, right? It's the thing that you as a user lose out on. Whew, that was a tongue twister. Damn. It is what you as a user lose out on if you are transitioning products, and that presents the barrier for entry for the other company coming in. I mean, Starbucks is a great example in theory, in the sense that if you use mobile order and pay, if you have like an account, if you have the app and everything else, and you have all the rewards, like, yeah, you could go to a third party coffee shop, and frankly, you might get better service, you might get a better beverage or whatever else, but you're going to lose out on all of those features that are involved that you've come to take advantage of. And that doesn't necessarily mean that Starbucks is having a network effect, but a network effect has an even more amplified or greater benefit from those services. So you as a consumer lose out even more by going away from it. So complementary benefits, we talked about that. So, you know, we use that video game example quite a bit, and obviously the software is a complement to the hardware itself. For a long period of time, people jokingly called Windows the Wintel platform because Windows and Microsoft were so like in bed with each other. You know, a lot of Microsoft software, hell, even still, clearly runs better on the Microsoft platform. I don't know how that's legal, but I mean, I'm sure they found a way. But like, frankly, and it's not even just me talking smack about Apple products, but like Excel on a Mac is different than Excel on a PC, and I much prefer it on a PC. And that's not like judgment, but it's just like it is a better product on a PC. And I'm sure a big part of that is Microsoft wanting their software to be complementary to their operating system, and it keeps you as a captured audience. So a one-sided market is one that derives most of its value from a single class of users. A two-sided market is two distinct categories. So we used Airbnb as an example last week, right? Where, and I mean, really any sort of sharing thing can fall under that category, right? Uber and Lyft and a similar piece, right? The sellers are benefiting from having more buyers. The buyers are benefiting from having more sellers. You create this amplifying feedback loop. And, you know, a one-sided market might be like maybe Amazon before they had the broad Amazon marketplace, right? Now it definitely is two-sided, but you could very much see it being just Amazon, and really it's people on Amazon creating a network effect, because the more people that are on there, then Amazon is able to expand a lot of the services that they're providing for people. And so it really does benefit in that way. But just understanding a monopoly or an oligopoly, that's a sucky word. I don't want to do that again. We'll just say that one. But monopoly is where there are many buyers but only one dominant seller. And then the oligopoly is dominated by a small number of powerful sellers. So you might think about, let's say, our current like oil and gas, right? I mean, you'd have to go and look, but it is definitely a small number of large-scale corporations that basically control a vast percentage of the oil and gas in both the US and internationally, right? So a monopoly ends up getting, wrong button. A monopoly ends up getting government intervention, and an oligopoly is something that is allowed. And, you know, people will certainly look at it. But, you know, one of the things that's kind of dangerous with this is if these companies are collaborating, that's where it turns into a very negative situation. And there has been a lot of talk of like regulation of like airline travel, where a lot, like there's only a few number of operators, and if they're talking about what prices should be, then they're price fixing, and that is very illegal. So, but you want to know what the difference between those two things are, just because, as we talked about in the class, there's a lot of similarities to some of the endpoint effects of those things as a network effect. And so I think this actually, I'm almost positive I will use this in some sort of examination format. But I think this really illustrates the network effect scenario. So you have an incumbent product and it creates value from its technological functionality, but then the exchange with the product's user base, the complementary products, the staying power. So for a new product to enter this market, it needs to be that good, right? It needs to be, what is that, 5 times as technically functional? So it effectively needs to be, for this visual example, it needs to be 5 times better than the incumbent because of all of this extra stuff, right? So I think that is something that really hammers home why it's so advantageous for a company to have a network effect and then possibly funnel into it and expand it where someone can't defeat it. And just for the sake of efficiency, I am going to leave, there's a couple of slides here, and they talk about the strategy of competing in markets with network effects. So this gives a lot of different examples of how different companies have either created network effects or have competed against incumbent network effects. And so there's a couple of different slides with this, and I think you guys should look over it, but because it is like kind of bullet point examples, I don't want to use a lot of class time for it. So the slides are in D2L. Again, these are all really good examples of how companies have used their resources or used maybe some creativity to try to fight against those network effects. And definitely know the Osborne effect, because that's something that we don't necessarily think about a lot, but for those of you that are Apple users, or actually I was talking about the Surface before class started, but a lot of these major companies, like they're going at their yearly event, announce new products, right? So like if you are interested in a new iPhone and it's coming close to the Apple event that happens in like September, October, something like that, right? It happens in fall. You're probably not going to buy a phone, right? Because you know that at that event, either there's going to be a new phone that you are more interested in, fine, or all of the currently existing phones will be discounted because that new product is coming out, like one or the other, right? So unless you need it right now, you're probably going to wait a little bit. And that is what this is talking about, where firms that experience a sharp drop in sales because either a pre-announcement or people know that a pre-announcement is coming. So, I mean, it can be one of, different ways. Like obviously companies like Apple, they just have this cadence, and so people know it's coming. But sometimes, especially with tech-related stuff, you'll hear like preliminary kind of discussion in media before it comes out. So that is all of the things. Don't get up just yet. Okay, so that's the Excel thing. But just going to wrap up for what you guys need to have as a line of sight for this week. Hopefully, projects. I would say for those of you that are feeling behind and maybe are behind, make sure you are done with the sim paths this week. And please try to have at least some of the projects started, finished, kind of thing. Because I am a huge advocate of you guys having enough time to prepare for the SimNet related exams, because those are the largest percentage of your grade of the unit. And so I want to make sure that you guys don't have to scramble with those. Discussion posts, people have been great. I'm going to continue trying to answer your guys' stuff. It does become a lot because I have so many students, but I'm trying to keep up with that. So hopefully that's beneficial to you guys and shows you guys that I'm in it too.